find ourselves in Gary, Indiana, late September, pushing October, about the wee 2, 3 o'clock in the morning hours. We find a group of 4 people huddled around a booth seat table, drinking coffee, eating hash browns, waffles, toast. And as the night progresses, we see 2 younger men walk in through the door. The bell jingles a little. They sit down at a booth table, and the waitress seats them and gets them coffee. We see one of the other hunters smirk as he pulls out a golden feather. It looks like fire as it turns in the light. The iridescent glow between red, orange, yellow, and a little bit of blue and purple at the ends as he twists it in the air. The waitress returns and gasps as she sees the feather in his hand. The hunter smirks. You see one of the other members at the table nearby. You see their ear twitch, almost cat-like, as they sense the noise in the other booth. You see a woman glance up with sharp feline face features, with fingernails that are entirely too long and very sharp. Another member, a younger man in his mid-20s, wearing a three-piece suit and a golden watch with a chain fob, slowly glance up from his coffee and toast. Third, you see a tall, thin man glance up briefly. His eyes go cloudy as if looking off into the distance somewhere. And lastly, a young woman with curly brown hair, glasses, glances down at her phone and begins to vigorously text someone. Hi, I'm Joel. This is my attempt at doing a campaign diary for my Monster of the Week game. We're currently using the regular book and the additional book, Tome of Mysteries. And I thought I'd just talk through our first session, talk about a little things I've learned, some of the game mechanics, stuff I've worked through, just to kind of give people an idea of how the game works, if maybe they're interested in it. And then kind of talk through how our first session went, maybe give you a little bit of our session 0 details as well, just to give people a better idea of how the apocalypse system works, how Monster of the Week works, and maybe steal some ideas to use with your tabletop games. So the scene I just described was the opening scene to our first session. There was a little bit of light roleplay, character introductions, but before we get to our first session, I want to start with session 0, which in Monster of the Week is kind of unique, because as you build your character, there's a section of history where you ask other people these questions unique to whatever playbook is of the hunter that you're playing, and kind of connect some strands to different party members, kind of give you a good feel and cohesion as you guys work together and create a really cool narrative. So my session 0, I did as the waitress bringing food to whoever was at the table, and as they accepted their order, the player described themselves, how they looked, maybe how they acted, and so just to give you an idea. So first off, we've got Val Raven, which is the 20-something man in the three-piece suit, has the golden pocket watch and fob. Crookeds get to have a lot of underworld connections, sneaky rogue type things as far as that type of archetype is concerned. We've got Omina, which is the cat-like lady, which is actually playing the Monstrous as a homebrewed version of a werewolf, except we're doing a werecat. Third, we've got the tall, thin guy, which is Thomas. He's playing the Spooky and has things like the sight and is able to see into the spirit world and kind of has dark powers and dark payments for those powers. Lastly, we have Astrid, which is the pararomantic, which is tied to either a hunter or some type of other creature, and they have some type of relationship. In this situation, Astrid's partner is Jess, which is a member of the Fey Winter Court, and they kind of communicate with each other, and we'll see how that relationship develops. Now, importantly, the difference in session 0s between my past, which is a lot of D&D and a little bit of Pathfinder. D&D, you write out all this stuff, plan all these things, and the players tear it asunder. Monster of the Week, I wrote maybe a page of what I wanted to do, because everybody works together to kind of fill in the gaps. Those history questions, everybody helps fill in each other's backstory, and we develop the world as we go. And honestly, that's one of the things I've liked a lot, because it takes a lot of the work and stress off on me, so I'm always looking forward to new games as we go on. And also, game mechanic wise, I don't roll any dice. They all roll the dice. If they mess up, I get to make moves. One other important thing that you should consider with a session 0 is also bringing up what everybody wants out of the game, what kind of game you're going to tell. In the Apocalypse system, and especially Monster of the Week, you're telling a cool narrative story. Everything is explained narratively. There's very little number crunching. It's all about everybody working together to have a good time. Something else you could also bring up, what is everybody's level of comfort? Are there any topics nobody wants to discuss? And if that happens, maybe some type of safety net. I know some people, if they play in person, they have cards with black X's on them and they'll hold them up, and we'll skip that topic or scene and move past it just to keep things going and everybody comfortable. In this scenario, I'm playing online with my friends over Discord, and so we also have a word that you can type in the chat where you can interject and say that word to kind of stop things and give people a chance to not be a part of the conversation if they don't like it, or just skip it entirely and we can reset. That way everybody's comfortable, everybody's having a good time, and we all have a good story to tell. Now finally, back to the story. This feather, what is it? What's it doing? I placed a shiny thing in front of the players, and we see them all do a little bit of stuff in their own ways, and they all use their powers. Well, what kind of powers do you have in Monster of the Week? So, there's a lot of base stats that apply to basic moves. So just to give you an idea, there's Cool, which is how cool, calm, and collected you are. Tough, how strong and mean you are. There's Charm, which is how pleasant and persuasive you can be. Sharp, which is kind of how observant you are to the details. And Weird is kind of how attuned you are to the supernatural. Those all give you modifiers, much like in Dungeons and Dragons, like your strength or whatever. Those numbers are then added to any types of moves you have. The book gives you a couple of basic moves, like Act Under Pressure, which is modified by Cool. That's how well you can keep your cool while doing something that you would normally be able to do, but maybe there's like a monster banging down the door behind you and you need to rush to do something. You might not be able to keep your cool while doing that task. This is the lady being chased by a killer and tripping on an invisible root in the ground. If you're cool, calm, and collected, not a problem. Help out involves cool. That can be assisting someone to give them +1 on a task if they want to do it. Investigate a mystery, which is the bread and butter of Monster of the Week, involves sharp. That's picking up clues and being able to ask me any types of questions. Now, something else to note quickly is dice rolls. 6 or below is a failure, but you get to mark experience, and I get to make a move. 7 to 9 is a partial success, and you get some type of consequence with it. And then 10 or higher is just a complete success. So with Investigate a Mystery, 6 or below, I get to do something. 7 to 9, you get to ask me 1 question from a list. And 10 or higher, you get 3 questions. There's Kick Some Ass, which obviously is fighting. It's based off of Tough. Manipulate Someone is Charm. Protect Someone also uses Tough as a stat. Reading a Bad Situation uses Sharp, which allows you to ask questions about the situation you're in. And Use Magic, which I'm going to put an asterisk next to because it's based off of Weird, but Tome of Mysteries gives you different ways to use magic, like telekinesis. You're able to open your senses to things, just different ways to use the use magic function. And then, of course, each playbook that each hunter has gives them unique moves to themselves. So again, back to the story. There's feathers here. So what happens first? Valraven the Crooked reaches out, uses Sense, which is modified by Weird, to kind of reach out. During the game, they did not roll well, and so as a consequence, they reached out with their psyche to kind of understand what kind of power came from that feather. And since they did not roll well, some type of cold spirit reached out, and in their mind's eye of them trying to investigate this spirit grabs onto their forearm with an icy coldness that's painful. And so in real life, Valraven kind of shakes themselves out of this mental space and yanks their arm away from the person, bumping into one of the other hunters and knocking coffee all across the table. Secondly, we have Omina, who has a little bit of an attention span problem, probably part of the animalistic nature as well. And they attempt to use telekinesis, but because they can be so scatterbrained at sometimes, maybe taking in too many things via the senses on top of ingesting lots of sugar and waffles, who knows. And so they decided to attempt to make a act under pressure roll so that they could focus and use telekinesis. They also end up failing that roll, and me, I don't know how to make some type of consequence for using that. So I go and look up what the consequences for telekinesis are, and one of them's make a fire. Perfect. A fire springs up in the kitchen in the back. and we move on. Finally, we have Thomas, who, as the spooky, flips on the vision and looks into the spirit realm and is shocked to see the two hunters in the booth discussing the feather, and a third hunter with a great slash across the chest and a stab wound standing outside of the diner, hand on the window, looking at the feather. As things go, this was my first attempt just to let everybody use their abilities, get used to the system, try rolling, and everybody working together to make a narrative. There was a lot of successes, a lot of failures, but each time everything seemed to narratively make sense. A fire in a kitchen, somebody jerking awake because it was so early in the morning, they were able to cover that up, and nobody metagamed, everybody kept their own narrative, and we moved on. So back to Thomas. He has this information, and what does he do? Player character decided to get up, excuse himself from the table, say he was going to go outside to have a smoke. He exits the diner, leans up against the wall, casually addresses the spirit, which he then finds that the spirit didn't know he was dead. He knew something was weird and something was off, but wasn't really sure what to do with himself. He just knew whatever was connected to that feather brought harm to him, and he didn't want to see his friends end up the same way. So the spooky, being sympathetic to the nature, kind of explained his situation in this afterlife. As it turns out, the backstory for our spooky is that they use their powers as a private investigator to kind of help move things along, and because of this helpful and giving nature, I didn't need a role to manipulate someone. Spooky was simply helping the spirit move on and understand what position they were in the afterlife. And in exchange, the spirit was kind enough to explain as they were packing up their hunting gear in the woods and they were getting ready to leave, they didn't catch anything for the day, and a strange bird flew by and he decided to take a pot shot at it. He managed to hit it, a feather had fallen off of it, and he decided to chase the quarry. The other two hunters thought it was kind of silly, decided to pack up and said to meet them at the diner when he's done. So they take off and leave, and this last hunter goes to chase. Obviously, the two hunters pick up the feather, and that's their situation. We then follow this third hunter as he's going through the woods. There's no blood trail. He saw it move off. There's a couple of broken branches, some type of trail to follow. But as he continues on, he keeps feeling his heart beating harder and harder in his chest, a thumping or a pounding, and feels something coming up behind him and turns around, and he has no memory. As it turns out, I didn't want to give away the farm of too much information with this character dying, but it also gives the players a chance to maybe investigate, see what happened, talk to the person. And so the spirit tells them a little bit of information, give them a little bit of a crumb, and the spooky seems fulfilled. He's got some direction of what he wants to do with his character, and he goes inside and brings that information back to the hunters. Now, as Thomas re-enters the building, he shares kind of a glance with Valraven, and this is where we bring a connection between the two characters. Valraven has actually been helping Thomas with his powers. Because he has that extra sensory perception, it's kind of like the vision, and so he's been mentoring Thomas to be able to help gain control of his powers. Because as the spooky, when you use their powers, there's eventually some type of payment that has to occur. Now, Valraven sees what's going on, brings up the subject, and they talk in vague terms just to keep the waitress out of the know and anybody who may be listening in on their conversation. It's discovered that they just need to get the feather away from those two hunters. So, Valraven excuses himself, goes to the bathroom. Valraven returns and feigns a little bit of excitement. Oh, that's an interesting collection piece. Would I be able to buy it from you? And these two hunters, obviously not wanting to part with their stuff, this is where we have a manipulate someone roll. Valraven decides that, a peacock feather tends to go for $20. Let's just give him 50 and see how that works. Alongside a manipulation roll, we hit above a 10, I believe into a 12. They take the deal given to them. These two country fellows who maybe were hunting decide that $50 is great for a feather. They release it, they've got beer money for the weekend, not a problem. However, now we reapproach that mental vision that Valraven had, and when he touches that feather, it's cold to the touch and it shocks him as a reminder of his connection to that object. He eventually tucks that feather away and walks it back to the table and presents it to the group. This is where we see the pararomantic who's on her phone begin to furiously Google search, take a picture of it, try to find out what we can do. There's a couple investigative mysteries, a couple of other interactions, and we later find out this is a feather to some type of firebird, firehawk, maybe a phoenix. Either way, this feather is some type of omen that something good and fortunate is going to happen, or that there's going to be some type of deathly ill omen. The group decide to use their own list of contacts to reach out to try to get more information. The pararomantic Astrid, who has a Fae contact, will go ahead and reach out to them. We find out that Valraven's underworld contact is also from the Fae, but from the Summer Court, which is opposite of Astrid's romantic partner, which is from the Winter Court. And then we also just have a couple of other research interactions that people are going to go perform on their own, but it's a good setup for how we wanted the story to move. As the tables are cleared and people pay for their checks, they all meet up outside to kind of discuss where it is they want to go from here. This is where we see Omina pass off a shirt that she purchased to Valraven, who is the roommate of Omina. And then Amina sheds a couple of pieces of clothes and transforms into a cat and takes off into the night. We see Astrid decide to go to a phone booth where we invented a mixture of magic and technology. You have toll booths, you have phone booths, you have fays, and there's phones, so we decided to make a fay phone. There's some type of payphone, similar to how I believe in the Harry Potter world, there's toilets that take you to the Ministry of Magic, phone booths that take you there as well. This is simply a phone that, given a specific Fey coin and placed into the slot with a couple presses of the button, connects you to a contact in the Fey. Astrid then uses this phone to call up her significant other and part of her character, Jess, who is a member of the Winter Court. Jess reports that the higher-ups, there's some type of stir, a reference to old magic, and something that they will investigate later and bring that information to Astrid. After that, Astrid and I RP a little bit together. There's a little bit of kind of hesitant romance going on between the two characters after getting this information. Things like, why haven't I met your friends yet? Oh, I've been too busy. And they kind of have a little bit of a awkward lovers conversation before hanging up the phone and moving on. It'll be interesting to see where that goes. Valraven heads home and contacts Fel, his significant other, and also underworld contact, the Summer Court. He texts him, sends that off, sends a couple emails out, but there's one thing that's missing. Let's jump back to Thomas. Thomas flickered his vision one more time while they were outside to see if he could discover any more interesting facts about the feather. Back at the diner, he flicks on his vision and he decides to ask the question, what's hidden here? And we see him catch a glimpse of a lady, an older lady in a white cloak, make eye contact with him before turning into snow and frost and blowing off into the wind. Thomas decides that he's going to go home and research this character, and much like the opening scene in the first Matrix with Neo at the computer, he's away, tapping away, and during his investigative mystery check, he fails. And so we see the camera pan away from Thomas at his computer as his hand is on his head and his head slides off and falls asleep. We see the window next to his desk is now covered in frost. There's now a missing handprint in the frost as we see that same woman pull her hand back and start to walk away from the window, leaving footsteps in the now frosted grass outside, before again turning into frost and disappearing. The next morning, as Valraven is sleeping, he's awoken by his phone buzzing, getting a text message from Fel. Fel says to meet him at the usual place, which means that Valraven gets up, gets dressed, sees that Omina made it home safe, is in her hammock in the same house as them, gets his jacket, and heads out. Valraven heads to the park, which is where he meets with Fel. They both share a bench next to a duck pond, which they then see Fel crumbling up half a muffin and distributing it to the birds into the water. And we see Valraven take a seat next to him and take the offered other half of the muffin. And although this is a little bit of a nice scene, Fel does not bring good news. He mentions that the body in the forest, the Fae did their own investigation. Even though the spirit had the slash mark and the stab wound, when they found the body, it had no skin. Something had stripped the skin and used it to leave a note on and tacked it to the wood. The Fae discover this note and see that it's a message from the Herald. A herald to what? Well, it seems like these heralds are ushering in the return of the Queen of Witches. Every 100 years, she returns, and her return is heralded by some type of shape-shifting rider that seems to change with the time of day and what they look like and what abilities they can do shift as the time of day changes. Fell mentions that if these heralds are not stopped with every kill, the temperature will drop lower. Winter will approach far too soon. Things will get colder in the Fae, and eventually this will spill over into the human world, possibly leaving them in some type of permafrost. This is where Fell mentions that he's worried about Valraven. This sounds very dangerous and something they haven't dealt with in a while. It's very old magic. He wants to make sure that Valraven is safe and to not chase after this without any help. We see Fell get up to go and leave, and Valraven grabs his hand. They share a quick kiss, and with parting words, they head their separate ways, and we go to our to be continued screen. Now, at the end of every adventure, there's a set of 4 questions that you're able to ask to see if something was solved, or just a couple of questions to help know that the narrative is moving on. As long as 2 of those 4 questions get answered, everybody gets an experience point. If all 4 get answered, they get 2 experience. Now that, in addition to failing rolls, is how they get experience to gain more skills and more moves as the characters move on. Now, this is my first campaign diary, and I will be sharing any cool things that I come upon and share that with you, as well as a brief summary of whatever our session was like, just like this one. Now, our game occurs about once every 2 weeks, so maybe a couple of days after the sessions, I'll try to record a campaign diary, leave this information here. Feel free to borrow or share any of this information if you want to use it in your sessions, or even make suggestions or comments about things you thought were cool. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.